1 month and counting before Canada enters uncharted waters. Come October 17th, recreational marijuana will be legal across the country. This was one of the Liberals' signature campaign promises, but concerns remain about risks to health and safety. Is the government anticipating a smooth rollout? Joining me is Minister of Border Security and Organized Crime Reduction, Bill Blair. Hi, Minister Blair. Pleasure to have you back on.
It's good to be on. Vassy, how are you today?
I'm good. I want to get to all these questions about legalized marijuana, but first I have to ask you about the story that we just talked about, Leona. I just lost her. Alislev. I'm sorry, Leona Alislev leaving your party, moving over to the Conservatives. Did it take you by surprise?
Well, it caught me by surprise, but I've worked very closely with Leona. I wish her all the best. I know it must have been a very difficult decision for her, and I hope she's well.
She says that she tried to raise her concerns, that she exhausted her options within the party, but she felt the only way she could criticize the party without retribution was to step away from it and actually make that move of walking away from government and moving to the opposition. What does that say about your party?
Well, I have to tell you, I'm a little bit surprised at that, because that has not been at all my experience. My experience in this government and with this party has been very collegial and collaborative. We talk often. We meet in national caucus. I've never experienced any impediment in being able to express my opinion or position, and frankly, I've always felt that I've been treated very respectfully.
Okay, I want to move on to legalized marijuana, because we're only a month away from that happening. There is a lot of apprehension about what's going to happen, specifically at the border. Have you met with your American counterparts since assuming your new role to talk about that?
Well, there has been discussions between principally Minister Goodall and his counterparts in the United States. Vassy, I would simply point out, for the last 5 years, we've had a very well-regulated medical marijuana industry in this country, and the hundreds and literally thousands of people who've worked in that industry have not experienced difficulty at the border. I'd also point out that there are close to 4.5 million Canadians who identified that they've used marijuana, and yet literally hundreds of thousands of people cross that border without incident or impediment each and every day. And so, I think as long as people are smart about the way they approach the border, recognizing that the United States, as every sovereign country, has the ability to determine who can or come in, and if one presents oneself, reasonably, and frankly, if you show up at the border looking like Cheech and Chong, you're going into secondary. But I think for the overwhelming majority of Canadians, they won't experience a significant change in the way in which the border operates.
How do you define, though, what Cheech and Chong looks like, realistically? I mean, I know it's sort of a funny thing to say, but I think there are a lot of people who are apprehensive, who are either recreational users or who invest or who work for a cannabis company, for example. I mean, is your advice, is the formal advice of the Government of Canada sincerely to not look like Cheech and Chong?
No, quite frankly, I think if one comes to the border looking like that one has recently used marijuana, or there's a strong smell of it in the car, one can expect that that'll draw the attention of the border security agencies. But I would simply point out the experience that we've had in the last 5 years in this country, where we've had a very large and active medical marijuana legalized regime, where we have literally thousands of Canadians working in that industry and have been for the last 5 years in a strictly regulated environment, and they have not experienced significant impediments at the border. And as well, we know that because they self-report, close to 4.5 million Canadians advise that they have used marijuana, and yet literally hundreds of thousands cross that border each and every day, and without incident or impediment. And so, I think based on that experience, I understand the apprehension. But I also have every expectation. The border agents on both sides of our border have a responsibility to keep our respective countries safe and to uphold our laws, and I don't anticipate a significant challenge. We will continue to work closely with our counterparts in the United States to make sure that they understand the concerns, the legitimate concerns of Canadians, but at the same time, I remain confident that the system will continue to function as it has in the past.
Do you really think, though, that the medical marijuana experience is parallel to what's about to happen in a month? I mean, you're talking about thousands of people working for companies. Take a look at what's happening on the stock market. There will be tens of thousands of Canadians impacted, whereas there might be a few, tens of thousands with medical marijuana. There could be 10 times that now. Do you really think that those are completely parallel?
Yeah, since 2013 in Canada, we've had a licensed medical marijuana production regime. It was implemented by the previous government, and that we have had a number of large Canadian companies that employ literally thousands of people in the licensed its production of marijuana for medical purposes. We're now moving into another licensed regime for the production of cannabis for medical and non-medical, but the business activity is the same. The experience of those who have been in this industry for the past 5 years, I think, informs us and Canadians about what we might reasonably expect for people involved in that industry passing back and forth before the border. At the same time, we are engaged in discussions with our American counterparts. You know, they have a responsibility to uphold their laws as we do ours. We want to make sure that Canadians are aware that, for example, it's a serious criminal offense to take cannabis across the border into the United States or from the United States into Canada. And those laws will continue to be upheld and enforced. And we just want to make sure that Canadians know what their rights and their responsibilities are so that they may not inadvertently break the law.
The device that your government has approved for roadside tests, it's a saliva-based one, and Ottawa police say that they're not going to be using it. The police chief says he's concerned about the machine's cost and lack of accuracy. Why would you approve a device that police don't think will work?
Well, I don't know the basis of the Ottawa chief's concerns, but what I can tell you is that device was recommended to the government by the Canadian Society of Forensic Science, Drugs and Driving Committee. It was submitted to the National Research Council to conduct over 200 tests on its efficacy and effectiveness. Those were the standards that were put in place for the approval of this device. I'd also point out that this device and others have been in use in other jurisdictions for well over a decade. And I'd finally remind all the police leaders in the country that in 2013, they urged the government of the day to give them access to this technology because it was going to help them detect impaired driving by drugs and to keep our roadways safe. We listened to what they asked for. We did the research, we did the testing, we've approved a device, and we are providing the resources to assist them in acquiring that device. I appreciate the apprehension of a new technology, but this is precisely what the police have asked for in order to increase their capacity to detect, deter, and prosecute people who drive while impaired by drugs.
The machines are said to be climate sensitive. They're said to cost $6,000. Are you concerned that the results from those tests, given these concerns that have now been voiced by this police chief, might not hold up in court?
No, I'll tell you, it's important to understand what we're going to use these devices for, Vassy. These devices will enable the police to form reasonable and probable grounds to seek blood testing, to draw blood at a medical facility in order for it to be tested to determine the level of THC in the blood. These devices only give the police that indication, which provides reasonable probable grounds and does not in and of itself provide prima facie evidence of impairment. And so it's important.
But it leads to the ability to gather that type of evidence.
Well, it's an important advance that the police have been asking for, that has been in use for decades in other jurisdictions. 18 European countries, for example, Australia and New Zealand, have all been using these devices to excellent effect in their jurisdiction. The police in Canada asked for access to this technology. We didn't just go out and buy the first thing off the shelf. We put it through the rigorous tests based upon the recommendations and the standards that were established by the scientific body that has that responsibility for the government. We've approached this very carefully and cautiously. We've also said that we'll provide funding so that police services who may not be able to afford this device, you know, you mentioned that they're temperature sensitive. So are roadside alcohol screening devices that the police use in every jurisdiction across this country. And so we field tested these devices and similar devices across Canada in police jurisdictions so that we would know that they would work effectively in police conditions and in the cold weather.
So what does it say that this police chief doesn't want to use it?
Well, I think we also have a responsibility to make sure that the police chief has all the information he needs to be confident that this device can be used effectively. The police have asked us for the authority, for the technology, and for the training so that they can keep our roadways safe. We've listened to them, Vassy, and we've also made available the money they needed to train their people and the money they needed to acquire this equipment.
Okay.
We've given them access to what they said they needed and what we believe other jurisdictions have clearly demonstrated works.
All right, thanks, Minister. I'm out of time. I appreciate your time, though.
Thanks, Vassy.
Have a great afternoon.
Bye now.